Welcome everybody. Hopefully you can see my screen. This is Aperu's Transitioning to High School event, tips for parents and students. It's the first year that we've done this event. I am really excited about it, both as an educator and also as the first time parent of a high school student this year. I'm excited. I may have worked in this industry for a decade, but I am excited to soak up what our panelists have to offer tonight. So my name is Natalie Henderson. I'm the CEO of Aperu's Tutoring, parent of a 9th grader, and really excited to learn. Let me introduce you quickly to our speakers and then get you guys started here tonight. So first, I'd like to introduce James Foreman. So James is currently the Director of Admissions and Enrollment Management at the Galloway School here in Atlanta. And before moving into admissions this school year, James served for 3 years as the principal of Galloway's Upper Learning School. And before that was the director of a middle school in Kentucky. So he has helped families navigate this transition from both sides, both the middle school and the high school. So we're really excited to have James here tonight and thank him for his time. And then also joining us is KP Garcia Paraso, who joined Aperu 5 years ago now. I went and looked and I was like, oh my gosh, it's been 5 years. She also works, so she currently works on our team as a tutor and executive functioning coach, but she comes from a long history of classroom tutoring. So she spent more than 15 years in the classroom as a teacher at really the elementary, middle, and high school levels, including a decade in the middle school and then 3 years in the high school level. She's worked in large urban public schools, in STEM specialized high schools, and most recently at the Lovett School here in Atlanta. So KP also comes at it with a wealth of experience working with both middle school and high school students. And we're just so grateful for you guys here tonight. Just very, very quickly before we let our experts answer your questions and our questions, at Aperu, we believe that if you can change a student's self-beliefs, then you can change their lives. I've worked as the past 10 years, I've seen so many students who come to us with these beliefs like, well, I'm just bad at math, or well, I'm just not organized, or well, college isn't for me. And if you can really start to get in there and challenge some of those self-limiting beliefs, you can expand what students believe for themselves, what they dream for themselves. And that is why we get out of bed in the morning. That is why we do what we do. That's why we try to put on these free events and resources and get good information out in the community, because if we can start to spread good information, then people will live different lives. So we do academic tutoring and test prep and executive function coaching, so kind of spans the gamut. And that's all I'm going to say about that. I'm going to stop sharing my screen and let us get to our experts. So thank you, James and KP. We're so excited that you guys are here tonight. I know for me, I figure we can all get hyper focused as parents, I think, on getting into college. And so I'd like our first question to, take one out of the playbook of Stephen Covey, and let's begin with the end in mind. And what would you advise parents to think about as the work of high school? Like, what should our goals be? What should we want for our children by the time that they graduate 12th grade? And like, how do we let that be the lens through which we view this experience? So I don't know, James, do you want to start?
Happy to. It's ironic because I actually just left this conversation with some of our administrators. So I'll give you less of what that conversation was and more just where the product ends, and that's the narrative. It's about developing a narrative that a student can speak towards, that not only qualitatively but quantitatively displays their passions, right? Displays their passions, whether that's within, the core academic field, whether that's in the extracurricular field, whether it's a combination of all those things. You want a student at the end of their journey to be able to articulate their growth, to be able to articulate the why as why they involve themselves in certain coursework, why they push themselves to a level of achievement, why they can honor the obstacles along with appreciating the successes that they've had along the way. That's what those college representatives are going to want to hear, and that's what they're going to echo. Frankly, that's the story that they're going to remember after they leave all the different area schools that they meet with students with. So I think the shorthand, without getting into the nitty gritty of course selection and things such as that, is developing a passion purpose course selection and a passion purpose student engagement journey that allows you to author the level of authenticity of the why of your involvement in these things.
And from my point of view, I would add to that like what I like to see out of students, most students I work with, like over the years, I just saw a sixth grader. I mean, I just saw an 11th grader, a junior, who I started tutoring in sixth grade. So I've tutored her all the way through. And I think what I like to see the most is like that they're turning into like functioning adults. Like, if that makes sense, because, you know, we all know an adult in our life who's 30 living at their parents' house. And, you know, we all have like bumps in the road, but the goal is to make them like independent adults, right? Like the difference between the kid who signs themselves up for the SAT, double checking their schedule with their parents, but they have their login, they sign themselves up, they're taking control of their lives. Because honestly, once they leave that nest at 17, 18, 19 years old, like you want them to be on the upwards trajectory so that then after college, they graduate, get a job and have a functioning life as an adult. And so to me, that's what I like to see kids doing is like little by little, parents are sort of pulling back and kids are coming into their own as they're developing those passions. They're learning how to do those things on their own. If they really like music, they're finding like other ways to incorporate music into their lives and some other, instead of like their parents always signing them up for this, signing them up for that, like to getting to a point when they are functioning adults, contributing members of society in whatever ways they can with those passions that they're developing.
That's the dream, right? Like that's the goal. So,
Yeah.
Okay. So then you guys have a lot of experience helping kids and families, really parents probably, navigate this transition. What have you seen the parents who've done that successfully? What does it look like? How do you peel back the scaffolding, right?
I don't, Kristen, you feel free to jump in. I was just going to say, I don't think it's a one size fits all. And I know that's not what you were asking. I think there's a variety of approaches that have bred success. But I think you all might work a little bit even more closely with families than even I get a chance to sometimes. So I would love for you to go first.
Yeah. So what I do like as an executive functioning coach, because when I tutor middle schoolers at the Levitt School, I was an in-house tutor and I worked there and worked with kids. I worked with everything in middle school. Once they get to high school, I just don't know all the subjects that well. We can't ever be experts in everything. So at a middle school age, you know, as they were like transitioning to high school, I started teaching them how to like advocate for themselves. So I mean, that's one thing, is teaching your kids advocating skills. Like if they come home and they're like, oh my God, my teacher's so unfair. She gave me a test today and she didn't even tell me there was a test. Like, first of all, they probably did, and someone wasn't looking on the calendar, listening or whatever, but you know, so, but talking to your kid and helping them to develop a plan on how they can address it. I think we all want, I don't have kids, but I have a niece and I know I always want to like help her like fix the problem. But again, we need to like help them help themselves, I think would be the biggest thing. So just saying like, if they come home and they're like, oh, I'm so confused on this. Okay, well, what would help you with that? You know, instead of just, I don't get it. Okay, what is it you don't understand? And how can we fix this problem? Have you been in to talk to your teacher? Okay, no, well, that's a good first step. Let's sit down and email her and let's construct an email right now and ask when a good time to come in for help is. So instead of just like emailing the teacher, Johnny's really confused, when can he come in for help? That's how we get them to go to spread their wings and fly on their own. So from my perspective, I think that's the best thing, is like teaching them how to advocate for themselves and like trying really hard not to just jump right in, and trying to teach them how to like what steps they can take to help themselves before you're just like, let me fix it for you.
It's sort of like when you were in driving school and dating myself, but I think the folks in the audience will understand this analogy when the driver had the pedals and you had the pedals as well. I mean, there was pedals on both sides, right? And I think that that's an analogy that's appropriate for the guidance that's necessary in a high school experience. You know, I always joke about when your kiddo starts to leave eighth grade, even a little bit of eighth grade, but as they get into high school, you know, parents, even if you're not a college football fan, start to understand the Heisman pose because your kiddo's just continuing to push you away and push you away because this is their, you know, domain. They want to take ownership over their learning. So it does require a bit of a partnership. And that's a dance in every family. And I think it comes with establishing routines. That's one of the easiest ways to establish the partnership as it relates to a student's, you know, academic achievement in their pursuits within school, is establishing some of those routines that allow for freedom, allow for family time, but also allow for, quote unquote, the work to get done, whatever that work looks like. So I think routines is one of the biggest things I would add on to. Of course, the advocacy is huge, and I'm so happy that you referenced that as well. The student voice is beyond necessary. It's something that we talk about at the schools that I'm at currently that I absolutely love it. And I always give the tongue-in-cheek joke of, you know, you give students a voice, you better be careful when they use it. But it's an absolutely beautiful thing to see students advocate for themselves, whether that's in need or whether that's something that they want or desire. So.
I love that. Thank you both. I would love that analogy of the two pedals, because like, yeah, that makes sense to me. And you know, yes, I had the two pedal cars.
Do they not do that anymore? Is it just a regular car now on driver's ed?
I don't know.
Ask me in a year, KP.
I literally, I mean, I actually have a few kids going through driver's training right now. I'm about to ask them after this.
You should. I love this idea of routine too, and establishing a routine and checking in, but also letting them own things. So, you know, I know one of the things that I'm finding, and I'm sure some of the other parents are finding as their kids get into school, is that so many of the assignments these days are online. So, as a parent, how do you, one, make sure that your kid's doing what they're supposed to be doing without overstepping, and I guess two, help them, right? Like we as adults sometimes have trouble focusing when we're sitting in front of a screen, which offers the world at a few clicks, right? Like how do we as parents help our kids focus when they're doing homework online so that they don't go to the YouTube or to, you know, Discord or to whatever else?
That's tough. One of the things that I go back to, one of the first things that you referenced was just the nature of scaffolding and planning for the work, and how parents even partner within that, and then how to limit the distractions. So the first thing that popped in my mind, and I always believe in the things that are tried and true, of course, adaptable to where we are in 2022. My parents used to get out the Franklin Planner back every Sunday. If y'all remember the Franklin Planner, where you get those pages out and start marking out your week. In those routines,
remember them. I mean, I still use it every day. That's like my Bible. I like paper. I like paper.
I thought I was falling on deaf ears. So I am just so happy.
No, man, I can't do it online. I just I gotta carry on. I still have my Franklin planners. Yeah, I was like, I don't even know where mine is right now, but it's never far away. It's always somewhere.
Exactly. It's the different systems of support, right? We have to adapt to where our kiddos are nowadays, right? So there's a variety of technologies or things that they might use that we're not accustomed to. And there's a variety of things that are tried and true. So that's where we talk about routines. We talk about the partnership with the kiddo. And I know that sounds funny, thinking about your child and a partnership with your child as it relates to their learning, but that's what it is. There's a bit of give and take because it's intrinsic motivation. You have to give in to some of the things that you know are going to help to breed them wanting to be a part of the partnership. And that is an ownership over how they document their work. You know, in some schools, as they move to high school, the planner no longer exists. For some folks, it still does exist, right? So I think it's a sit down as you encounter those high school years, or even as you're going through eighth grade. This is actually fruitful time to see what works, right? And allow some ownership over what works. Allow some of the natural consequences that happen over what doesn't work, although it is difficult. So without going too far down that rabbit hole, that's one thing I would exercise. And also, I hate to what's it called, continue to reiterate a point, but the routine of checking in. I always tell my families, my ninth grade families, Sundays and Wednesdays are absolutely perfect as far as check-ins, right? And we're going to scaffold the beginning of our week. Look, we all got things going on. You know, we're doing this, your siblings are doing that. Just want to make sure we're all on the same page. So everybody gets their quote unquote planners out to start off Sunday, just to make sure everybody's on the same page. And then Wednesday, there's just a natural check-in of, hey, where you at? Let me just see where your courses are. Most of your kids' schools allow you to have logins to some of the information learning management systems that they use. And I would truly talk about the partnership around, hey, I'm not going to micromanage you, but if I start to get emails, we're going to have to start to sit down more times than just Sunday and Wednesday. And I feel like I'm going too far off my screen time. So Kristen, please feel free to chime
Well,
in.
I was going to say, like, well, with the technology issue, like I know today, my Mac like updated to whatever the new OS system is. And then I was like, you know, it's like, do you want to see the new features? And I was like, yeah, fine. Show me what you got, Apple. So there was one on there that said that you could turn on, like, just like you can on your phone, like you can turn on like focus time. And so now the new Mac operating system, if they have a Mac, but I'm sure like PCs have something like that. So I would say, because, you know, kids, their phone is obviously going to be sitting near them. So helping them to, like, if they don't use that feature on their phone, like, look, you can put on this focus time, you can put it on for an hour, and like encourage them to put that on, because we all know they're not going to turn it off or put it away. But if we can get them to use that focus feature, just like when I'm in a meeting, and just tell them, like, yeah, when I go into a meeting or when I need to sit down, and say, like, because they're not going to get anything done if they're checking every time they have like Snapchat. Or today my student was telling me there's some new thing where you take a picture every day and it's like what's happening behind and what's happening in front, and I don't even know what that was. I don't know, it's some like one thing a day or something, I can't remember, review or something it was called, but there's new stuff coming up every day, right? So teaching them to do that. Okay, you know, set aside an hour. Another thing I tell students to do that have trouble with that is, like, especially with kids that have like attention difficulties, set a timer on your phone and be like, okay, I'm going to work for 30 minutes, 45, an hour, like whatever your time span is. And then set your phone on focus and put the timer on for whatever time you think you can focus, put it aside, and like, be like, I'm going to do this. And honestly, sometimes when I do that, like I do that with cleaning. I hate cleaning. I put the timer on in my kitchen. I'm like, okay, I'm just going to clean for a half an hour. Well, I'll tell you what, if it goes off and I'm not done in a half an hour, I usually will finish cleaning anyway, because then I'm that far into it and I'm like, whatever, I'll just finish. But like just that first day, like, I'm just going to clean for half an hour, whatever gets done in that half an hour. So that, but then I'm also like, okay, then take a break. And guess what? You also need to set a timer, like, you know, Siri, hey Siri, wake me up in 5 minutes, you know? Oh, now she's actually going to do that. But you know what I mean? And then you say, okay, now you can get up for 5 minutes. I don't know, send some Snapchat.
For 6:24 p.m.
She did just do that. Siri, I was just not talking to you, but you know what I mean? Like, say that you're going to do that, and then give yourself that 5 minutes to like play with your dog, send some Snapchats, whatever. But when that timer goes off, sit your butt back into the chair, put your phone back in focus, put it on for 45 minutes. So I think that goes to James, like, structure, but you have to like teach your kid that, because honestly, if your kid already is doing that, then they probably don't need to have this conversation. So, but yeah, so that's a couple things I'd say: using that focus feature, setting a timer, and just telling yourself, like, okay, I got 45 minutes and I can just do this assignment, no YouTube, no anything else. And it makes it feel less like, you know, they just feel like they're like missing out on what's happening in the world. But if it's just 45 minutes, fine. And then give yourself 5 to check that social media, and then back for 45 minutes again.
Awesome. Thank you both. Like, so helpful. James, you mentioned, you said, use some buzzword, natural consequences. So that is an easy thing when you have a 4th grader who like doesn't study for a test or doesn't do the project, right? And you're like, oh, they're going to learn natural consequences. What would you advise to parents who are like, but this is real, it counts now, and like, it's going to affect their future. And so how do I let them experience that natural consequence, but, you know, not too much?
Well, and I appreciate that. And it's not that I say that, and I think I even referenced you, or you can see it in my body language, that I don't take that lightly in offering that advice. But truly, you can read the different books from Michael Gurian about, how boys, girls learn differently, or the different thought experts that are out there about neuroscience and how the brain works for adolescents and how they develop. I just go back to, sometimes you have to touch the fire twice to realize it's hot. It's a short change way of getting at it. But as your student encounters ninth grade and as they encounter high school, I mean, it's a scaffolded approach to their learning experience. And that's exactly how a college counselor looks at their transcript. And that's exactly how, hopefully at the schools that your student will be attending, their teachers look at the experience, right? So as you go to your back to school nights, just as we used to have that first day back to school, you'll get the syllabus. You'll be able to look and see where the floor is, where the ceiling is, right? How many missed assignments lead to fill in the blank. And that's also where open conversations come with your kiddo about their achievement, and those Sunday check-ins, those Wednesday check-ins about the tangible low-hanging fruit, whether that's a homework assignment, whether that's preparation for a quiz, because what you're doing is partnering and reiterating, hey, I remember in Miss Betsy's class that if you miss an assignment, so I haven't seen that up there just yet. Have you seen, can I help you with that? So that's a part of the partnership portion. But some of those natural consequences are, you've seen that assignment is not in for Miss Betsy. You have reminded your kiddo that it's not in. It is that day. That assignment's going to have to equate to the zero that takes place. So it's about preparing yourself and the messaging to your kiddo about, okay, how do we move forward from this? What lessons have we learned from this? And ensuring that does not happen again. And please, I could give a lot of caveats, I think, is appropriate to the different circumstances that present those situations. I'm really talking about a cookie cutter situation with a kiddo who has just dropped the ball on an assignment, not a kiddo who might be struggling with some of the executive function, not a kiddo who might have some diagnosed learning disabilities or things such as that. So I'm really giving just a broad brush to that. But I still do believe, and I think our learning specialists and some of those who I've worked with in the past would agree, that appropriate natural consequences with a safety net are needed in order for a student to be able to grow from time to time. If there are moments of resistance, if there are moments of not committing to the plan, if there are moments of quote unquote wanting to do it my way and not listen to what mom, dad, parents, have to say about the support that's necessary, or their teachers.
If I could add to that, I would just say, like, another, when I think of like a natural consequence, instead of being like, say, grounded for not turning the assignment in, maybe the consequence is that next week from 4 to 5:30, you're sitting at the kitchen table. That's where you're doing your work, because whatever was happening in your room, you told me you were doing that assignment and like that didn't get done. Okay, so you pick the time, and for that hour and a half, you're sitting at, like, either we're gonna like move a desk in here or just gonna sit at the kitchen table or parents' desk or wherever. And now I'm not gonna stand over you like this, but you're just gonna be in a public area, and I'll be doing whatever, reading a book, maybe cleaning the kitchen, whatever it is I'm doing. But you know what I mean? It's like, okay, for next week from 4 to 5:30, that's going to be your work time. And now I'm going to set a specific work time where you're sitting in a specific place. And if it goes well, then maybe we can talk about, like, next week going back to, like, maybe you only have to do that 2 days a week or whatever. That to me seems like a natural consequence. Instead of just you're grounded, it's like now you have a specific time and place for a certain amount of time that you're going to do your work.
Can I reinforce one thing that we're talking about, and that's life
Yeah.
lessons, right? It's what we're preparing our kiddos for. It's not necessarily, it is that next step of college and the freedom that comes with that and the responsibility of the academic pursuits. But it's getting outside of that bubble. And that's where the quote unquote natural consequences lie. And what Kristen was saying relate to, where do you get your work done best, right? And what environment do you get your work done best in, right? And what I'm referencing is sort of like the work-life balance or the college life balance that they'll feel very quickly, where you truly are in these big colleges and universities, and no longer are you James Foreman, you're one student out of X amount of thousand, and the syllabus says you've missed 2 assignments, Mr. Foreman, and here's your grade as such. So I think what we're reinforcing is low stakes, natural consequences that reinforce with the why. And that's one thing that I continue to coach families on. High school is the terrible twos again, but they're not just saying why, they're asking it in a different way. It's typically yelling or throwing a fit. But it is the terrible twos of why. If your student, your child, knows the why behind some things, it does make some of the partnership a bit easier. But please know, I am only the parent, the former parent to 328 students. I have no kiddos on my own. I only have puppies. So I've never had to do the home environment. I've only done the school environment.
Well, thank you for that, and thank you, KP, as well. So let me switch gears on this a little bit. I think we've all heard a lot these last few years about learning loss and about how much students were impacted by COVID and by the change in many of their learning environments. And I know I read a study last week that suggested that the kids who were in middle school actually suffered the greatest losses and have seen the least recovery from those losses. And that is our kiddos, right? And so how can a parent identify if their student is struggling with the normal transition to high school struggles, or if there's something more going on and they need a deeper intervention? What signs would you look for as a parent?
That's a tough one. I mean, I think across the board, I'm mostly a math and science tutor, and the math has struggled a lot. I mean, my kids that I'm tutoring, ACT and SAT, like some of them have just like a blank slate where geometry should be. Like they straight up tell me that like I used photo math. I cheated my whole way through it. I mean, I'm thankful that they're like honest with me, because I'm just their like ACT and SAT tutor. I didn't grade them. Like they just straight up tell me like, nope, I cheated all the way through that class. It's empty. I just need you to fill some stuff in for me. So hopefully with middle schoolers, it's not as much that, because I feel like maybe middle schoolers would be less, especially 6th and 7th graders. But I think just going in it with an assumption that these kids like are not up to par where if they had not gone through COVID. So like what you would expect a normal rising 9th grader to like know and be comfortable doing is not going to be the same, because they just, those middle school years where they're like formulating, that's like pre-algebra. They're like, and algebra, it just depends what grade, so but most kids get at least pre-algebra, some have algebra, and that's like the foundation of the rest of high school math. So I would err on the side of like, especially with math, that's going to be a struggle. I feel like it could also definitely be in like writing, right? Because when you have a teacher sitting in front of you and you're peer editing sitting in front of someone, and then you're like going over grammar and talking about that, like that just couldn't have been the same, it's just, so I feel like they could have like definitely a lag in writing skills. Like thankfully for science and history, it's kind of like each year is like different. You learn a different kind of history. So I feel like those two don't necessarily trickle into each other as much as like a writing and English class would in math. So yeah, that's one thing I would sort of err on the side of like, probably a lot of stuff they're struggling with writing and math are because of those COVID years. So that's something I would go into thinking. James, do you have anything else to kind of add to that?
I think you nailed the identifiers within the core academic experience that would kind of raise some red flags. I would also add, depending upon your students' ability to develop their voice, the content of their writing, and then the voice that's being used within there. As we think about some of the social emotional, as I talk about Peggy McIntosh references, the invisible knapsack starts to fall out. So that's something I would keep an ear to the ground or an eye to the page with as well. So yeah, KP, you said it all. The only thing I also reference is social, and giving a grain of salt to the social experience. Many students, and I'm not sure how it happened with public schools or even other independent schools across even our Atlanta area, but many middle schools cohorted or worked within similar groups with one another. So the broad range of experiences as far as working with a variety of students hasn't happened in the same way that it would have happened in typical middle school environments, even if that's a 5-6 pod, 7-8 pod, or however they intermingle with one another. So I would ear to the ground with the social experience. I wouldn't inventory for pain, as a former counselor used to say. Ask them what has gone wrong with their day, but to ask them, some of the strides that they have made socially, make sure that they are connecting. That doesn't always mean a play date every weekend or hang out every weekend, but it does mean that they are gaining traction, that you start to hear some familiar names or experiences or different experiences that are taking place, and seeing how they engage as well. Giving them opportunities to engage with things that are on campus with it. I know there are a variety of opportunities. You have clubs for this for that, that'll take a variety of students off their campus. And I know I might be speaking to an audience that might be independent school, public school, but I know that there are different ways for you to engage with your school community, with whether that's arts, whether that's sports, extracurricular opportunities. And that just gets you within that same different pollination of school students, as opposed to, retreating home, for lack of better words. So I would pay attention to the social experience, and create some opportunities to leverage the social experience, because that's something that our kiddos missed out in the middle school years.
So helpful.
Yeah, just to piggyback off that, I tutored a girl who just graduated and is heading to NYU next week. And she has a sister who's a rising ninth grader. And I was chatting with her, and she was saying that her sister, when she was like in elementary school, she was like super bubbly and always had all these friends. And she was like, yeah. And then during COVID, she just like stopped talking to anyone. And she was like, she said she became kind of emo and so she recently, the mom and the daughter moved to California. And this conversation was in the context of that. The sister was telling the younger sister, like, just delete your Instagram and start over, because she was like, yeah, you kind of went through like a dark time there. And like the stuff you were posting in there and the stuff you were saying there isn't really like representative of like who you are now. And so she was trying to talk her mom into her sister into like just her sister. And if people were like, oh, why don't you have anything like back from middle school? Just be like, oh, like I got hacked and I had to start a new account, like easy peasy. But yeah, so I think it really did affect that age group, because that's really when you learn to socialize, right? That's also like when you're younger, a lot of people like only have, like, girls have female friends and boys have male friends. Not always, but a lot of elementary kids are like that. And middle school is when you start developing more friends of the opposite sex. So they sort of like missed out on that, because they were online, and they became like more and more into this like social world where they communicated just what they were posting on Snapchat and Instagram and this and that. So I think because of all that James is exactly right. Like, I know when I was in ninth grade, I went through this like weird phase that I like didn't have a lot of friends. My mom like literally signed me up for the pep club because I didn't play sports, made me go work at the football games. So I wouldn't sit at home because I didn't have friends to go with the games to. But, I made some friends doing that, and, I turned out okay. So I guess it worked out. So sometimes, like, I'm not saying sign your kid up for the pep club and make them go work at the football games, but find something they like. I know Lovett has this like after school thing where you can go like walk dogs. Like they like partner with like a dog shelter, and they go there. And then that's like one week. And the other week they go to like senior citizens and like play checkers and stuff. So, I mean, maybe that's their thing, like music, sports, but definitely like strongly encourage your kid to sign up for stuff and like do some kind of after school activity, whether it's within school or if your school doesn't offer it, Girl Scouts, Boy Scouts. I guess that's more of a middle school thing, but I don't know, whatever it is, like try to get them out of the house and doing something, because they really went inward, and they really went into social media, and like, that's not a great place to exist full time. So
yeah, thank you both. I think it's a helpful reminder that the goal of high school is not just academic, right? That this is a really important time to shape social experience as well. And just as parents being mindful of, are we encouraging that? In your case, KP, mandating that? Like, what does that look like? But I think that is helpful. Well, jumping off of there a little bit with the cell phones and the fact that they did go in and they are so connected digitally. What advice would you have? I know some schools they treat cell phones differently, right? And so some of them, they do the work of the parent and say, okay, they can't be in the classroom. And some don't. My kid happens to go to a large public high school where the phone is on them all the time. So as a parent, when you need your student to have that technology for safety and communication about transportation and other things, and you also need them not on it during class. What advice would you have?
I think this goes back to the same thing, like the focus button. I mean, I assume Androids have something similar to that as well, of just like teaching them that like that is sacred time, and like, you know, there, you can't pay attention to two things. And maybe, I mean, to me, I would probably do this to my kid, but that's just the kind of person I am. Like if I find out they're on their phone in class, like one day when they're telling me a story, I just like be like this. And then they'd probably be like, Mom, what are you doing? And I'd be like, what do you mean? And then when the kid's like, are you even listening to me? And I'd be like, are you listening to your teacher when you're playing on your phone? So I'd probably almost model for it, but that's like the kind of, I just have that kind of sarcastic, snarky kind of personality. So I'd probably do that just because they would, of course, they're going to be like, Mom, are you even listening to me? But yeah, I think it's just like, again, teaching them the strategies of like, fine, during hall change, if you're allowed to have your phone out, fine, I don't care, whatever, get it out, send your snaps, send your texts, get on Instagram, I don't know, whatever these kids do. But once you walk in that class, just hit the focus button. Because honestly, even if they're like putting it in their pocket, they'll feel it buzz, they'll go off. But if they just get in the habit of like, okay, you know, you just bring it down the corner, hit the little focus button, do not disturb, set it down. It's on do not disturb for 45 minutes, right? Once I get out of class, fine, turn it back off, do not disturb. But I think just teaching them those habits of when you're in class, you put it on do not disturb because you should not be disturbed. So.
Okay. When you were in your phone, I was like, what is she doing? She's so distracted. You're so distracted.
You're right. Can you imagine if your kid is like trying to tell you something and you're like,
I don't know. I get yelled at constantly already from the phone too much downstairs. So I should be listening to your advice as opposed to me trying to give advice. So one of the things that I've seen that has been successful and it relates back to natural consequences, and it's going to sound funny, and I would have brought a prop, but it would take me way too long to dig around my desk. But y'all, we all have an old phone somewhere that we can have turned on, correct? So one of those natural consequences is as you check in with these teachers, not regardless, but in context to how your check-ins happen with teachers, given your school environment and the routines that you have with your kiddos' teachers. If you hear that phone is interrupting learning, I think they get the old phone that can only receive calls from you. That you put in the old phone and say, listen, that other one is mine. I pay for it anyway. So you've lost that privilege because it is not a right. And then they quickly, you know, if they don't already know the difference between a privilege and a right, they get to have that conversation with you as well. It's a natural consequence that also has redeemable qualities, right? You give them the opportunity to get it back. You earn this back by, you know, no longer having those interruptions or a successful grade. But I don't know what the carrot is that you would dangle out as a result. But I have seen this, y'all. I'm not just referencing this from, you know, something I saw on TV. This happened in my last 3 years as an upper learning principal. And I can tell you that it was very effective with the kiddos that it happened to and whose parents immediately emailed and said, way to go. I have learned something new.
I love it.
That's hilarious. You give them like the burner phone, basically.
Yep, you give them
That's going to be the new thing in our house. Let me tell you. Like, all right, if
I like that. That's a great idea. I never thought about that.
Because you can still reach them for emergencies, right? And they can still contact you. They can still contact whomever for emergencies, but they have to call. They have to type 6 times to get the one letter if they're going to text somebody.
Oh, they probably wouldn't even figure out how to like do it. They'd be like, what is happening?
Love it. I love it. Awesome. Well, just a couple of questions and then we'll open it up and let others ask questions as well in our last few minutes. But what can we as parents do to support, you know, Carol Dweck talks a lot about growth mindset, right? That like in the end, you want kids who are gritty, who are going to try and persist and not give up when they first meet a challenge. And there are a lot of challenges ahead of our kids. They're going to meet them in high school, they're going to meet them in college, and they're going to meet them later on in life. So how can we as parents during this time be sort of shaping our kids and helping encourage that growth mindset?
It's a great question.
I mean, one thing I would say is to get out of like what you were talking about when you said the Aperue thing, like instead of saying I'm bad at math, or instead of saying I don't get this, okay, what is it that you don't understand? What part are you confused about? I don't understand any of it. Okay, let's start back at the beginning, you know? So that's what I do with kids, is like, you're not bad at something, you're just not great at it yet. So trying to get them to reframe what they're saying and like have them repeat it back to you. Okay, like it's not that you're bad at writing, you're just still learning how to write. You're just still working on it. So I think constantly sort of reframing what they're saying when they say something to you, saying back to them, and then trying to get them to change their language. Okay, like, listen, I don't want you to keep saying you're bad at math. That's not true. You're just struggling at this exact moment, and you are working hard to improve your math abilities. And it's not going to come overnight, but little by little, if you work hard, you can get better at this. You can get better at everything, you know? So we're not all going to get a 1600 on our SAT, 800 on math, but you're starting at a 400, you certainly could get to a 500 with some hard work and trying. So I think how you speak to your kids, also when you give them praise, instead of saying like, oh, great job on that 100, it's like, oh, like, I really like how you showed your work on this test. Like, that's great. And that probably really helps you get a great grade on here. And just giving very specific language, like you pop in their room and you see that they're like studiously working, their phone's off to the side. Like, man, I really like how you have your phone off to the side and how you're really focused. And it looks like you're really working hard on this paper. And that's great. And I can tell that your writing is really going to improve with this hard work. So instead of just saying like, you're doing a great job, when you give really specific feedback on how they're improving, that helps. And I know a lot of schools are like training their teachers to do this as well.
Yeah. Spot on. I mean, shared language is phenomenal in process, not product, right? Because you're focused on the skill development, not necessarily the product of what's taking place. It's not just an achievement focused conversation. That is. I come from a Southern Baptist background, so I'm waving over here and like, but you can't see it. So a couple things that I will just add on top of that is creating an open dialogue. And I know that can be difficult, right? So finding your touch points and using those touch points. Sometimes and I know that, you know, that all kids behave differently. You know, it's one thing when I was working at an all boys school, I used to do all the time. We used to go out and either walk, toss a ball, and it's not sports oriented, right? But toss a ball, do something other than focusing on the dialogue. And next thing you know, we're in dialogue, right? About the test, about the stress, about the problem. So, you know, I'll even go to my personal background. For my mother and I, it was always that Sunday dinner that we used to drive to Granny's house. It was always like, hey, so how are things going? Right. And it's like, oh, this is when we talk. Right. It was low stakes, high reward for my parents, and looking for your low stakes, high reward moments and truly growing and thriving in those, using, as KB said, shared language, focusing in on applauding the skills and triumphing in success and supporting through the stress. Right. And that success is not just academic success. Right. If it is taking those 2 steps socially, and you heard that, you know, James, you know, made the step to connect with so-and-so, made the step to go to the club, celebrating those successes and supporting through some of those stressful times, because they are inevitably will come, and providing what they need in that time, and not trying to always fix the problem, but letting them know that you are there to support them through the problem, using those different avenues that you'll hear about on back to school night, that you've been aware of to address the problem, whether that's your child's advisor, whether that's going to the teacher, whether that's the club teacher that they have a good connection with, using the different points of contact to ensure that they are making it through their day and providing the necessary support at home, and modeling and sharing, right? And what I mean by that is the sharing is not going into, oh, back in my day stories. What is so valuable and tangible for your kiddos is relating to them from where you are. You know, when you talk about what happened in your professional life or in your workday that relates to an experience that they actually can connect to because they saw it, they saw the, you know, the impact of, or heard you frustrated about, you know, modeling some of those triumphs, modeling some of those successes, and when they've happened for you, and being honest about, man, that was tough. You know, you didn't see me work on A, B, C, D behind the scenes, but that's what allowed me to be successful. So, James, I understand what you're going through, and listen, I'm here if you need me. and I have some tips if you want it. And so I'm continuing to go down that rabbit hole, but those are some of the things that I would one add on to and echo as KP has said.
Oh, that, thank you. So great. I think I have found that magic things happen when you're in a car with a teenager, right? There's something about being in a space together where you are not looking at each other, or that eye contact might be intimidating, and they open up a lot. So I think that's really helpful. I like the reminder to praise the process, praise the effort, not necessarily the outcome. Great. Well, last question from me, and then we will open it up to others, is what is the thing that you just wish every parent who sits where we are now would know?
I'll jump in with what I used to start every back to school with, and it's, I don't know if it's been successful, but we've had some good experiences in Louisville and in Atlanta, in the schools that I've helped to support, is then knowing that we're all coming from the same place. There is not one person in that building, and I'll point to the building that at least I know of. There is not one person in our building that does not want the same goal for your child, our student. And that is for them to be the best that they can be by the end of their time here, at the end of their journey. So we might come from different perspectives. We might have, different ways of approaching something, but know that in the end result, we all have the same exact goal. And that is developing your kiddo, our student, into the best self that they can be in order to be prepared for that next step.
Yeah. And I would say that, just make sure like you keep the line of communication open, and know that like if your kid fails something, like know that like they might have really tried their hardest and still failed it. I mean, I would not assume that, but like go into it with an open mind. And if they failed it, don't just like yell at them, telling them like you failed it, because again, remember like the COVID situation. And sometimes, I mean, I had kids who used to fail like math tests, and I'd be like, I studied for like 6 hours, and I knew the kid, and I knew they really did study for that. They probably did. They wouldn't make it up. And then I'd say, well, like, what did you do to study? Like, well, I looked at all my notes. They'd go through everything. I looked through my notes. I looked at the problems we did in class, and I'm like, okay, like, do you play a sport? Yes. Okay. So when you go to football practice, do you like just sit on the sidelines and like watch, or like, what do you like go to the Falcons game every week to like get some improvements and get some ideas? Like, no, what do? I get on the field and actually run the drills that my coach gives me. Okay, this is math. You got to get on the field. You got to do it. So all that to say that like, come at it with an open mind, right? Keep those lines of communication, come at it with an open mind, natural consequences. Don't just punish right away. Just ask them like, hey, I saw this grade wasn't probably what you wanted it to be. So what happened? What happened? What do you think? And sometimes they'll just come to you and be like, I didn't study as much as I should. Okay, well, how can I help you? How can I help you to fix this issue? Like, you know what I mean? Do you want some suggestions, or you want to tell me what you think you're going to do differently? Or if they're just like, I studied for like 5 hours and it didn't work. Okay, well, and sometimes they might need to talk to the teacher, because it's like, high school is different. Like each teacher teaches a different way, and you might not know exactly. So I just say, come at it with an open mind, keep the communication open, always assume the best, and give them a chance to explain themselves and what happened, and give them a chance to like fix it before you just jump in, because that's how you're going to create this like self-sufficient adult that's going to go off into society and like be a functioning member of society, which is what we want, right? That's a goal.
Awesome. Well, thank you both. I will open it up to the audience, participants. I don't know, y'all. Still 3 years in, still learning webinars. But if you guys want to put anything in the chat, happy to ask your questions for KP and James.
Has anyone put anything in there thus far? We'd probably see it.
A very quiet bunch.
They've been listening, I guess, because I see them in there. I see our participant numbers there. So I know you're here. Questions, comments, concerns. All right, you can put it in the Q&A. So there's a little Q&A section. So if you have a question, you can type it in that Q&A and it pops up from our side. And then There we
So
go.
we have a question from Derek Payne asking, what do you think about incentives? What's worked?
I didn't hear the second part.
Oh, she said, what do you think about
seen work?
incentives? What do you think about incentives and what have you seen work? So as a school principal, have you had experience with parents like putting incentives in, or?
Oh my goodness, yes. I mean,
Has it worked?
there's the extreme, and then there's the realistic, and yes and yes and yes. Intrinsic motivation is intrinsic motivation. So I would, it's a blessing and a curse, right? If I take all the levity out of it, it's a blessing and a curse. So you want to be realistic with what those incentives are, right? It's low hanging fruit, right? It's the things that possibly could be shared experiences or family experiences, right? One of the things that, oh, this is funny. I'm happy I remembered this. One of the things that was incentivized to me in middle school, because I was a bit of a troublemaker. I used to disrupt class. No one could believe that, which made me a great principal. Was, hey, if you go a term without disrupting class, we're gonna, I had O season tickets, and my family had O season tickets, Baltimore Orioles. I grew up in Baltimore, and so we would go and commit to a certain amount of games as a result of me not acting up during that time. And I know that that's middle school behavior, but that was community time. That was family time, but also was incentivized for me because I absolutely loved going to Camden Yards. So that's low hanging fruit where I'm not tipped. The scales aren't tipped for my parents to think of something bigger, greater all of the time, to incentivize me to do something that I should be doing anyway. So that would be my advice.
But I like the idea of an incentive being something that is family time, because we all know at this age, at teenagers, again, like you said, the Heisman Trophy, they start pushing you away. So if you could make the incentive something that's going to cause going to create more family time together, and you obviously you got to think of something that the kid really enjoys. But I do like incentives better than consequences, unless they're natural consequences, but rather than like being grounded, if you do act up, we can go to the O's game if you don't act up, and having something to like look forward to. I've also seen the whole thing of like with like chores, for example. I saw this before when I was a teacher, where like, the kid gets $30 at the beginning of the month, like a younger kid, they get $30 at the beginning of the month. And then you just have the $30. And each day that you don't do your chores, it's like $1 gets taken out. So as long as you do it, you have the $30, but you don't have to like, they can't maybe imagine that they're going to have the $30, but like, you got it. It's just in a jar and you can see it every day. And as long as you keep doing what you're supposed to do, you get it. So, I don't know. So if it just came to straight up like consequences, like not natural consequences, but just like you're grounded versus like an incentive, I think that incentives are going to have a better and more positive impact. But again, like James was saying, it's a low hanging fruit. So incentives to get the ball rolling, but also work on that grit and intrinsic motivation, because at some point, what happens when they get to college or have a job and don't meet a deadline, there is no incentive. Well, maybe there's a bonus, but also you can just get fired if you don't do your work. So then they're back on your couch again, which, like I said, the whole goal is to have them not come back on your couch.
Awesome. So, we are hearing that there's a message that the host has disabled chat, but the Q&A works fine. So forgive me for suggesting that you chat your questions. You should use the Q&A box, which works much like chat. It's just a different box down there.
It's just that we can't chat back.
Yeah, we just can't write back to you. We probably have time for one more. If not, we'll get you guys out of here, but I want to make sure that we're respectful of everyone's time tonight. So, all right. Well, thank you. I just want to thank James and KP again for making the time tonight, offering all of their insights and advice. This is a scary time as a parent, but also an exciting time. And so, look forward to this journey. Let me wrap us up here with just I'll also
say real quick, just my own little personal plug, that I am a full-time online tutor now. I recently moved to Mexico. So I'm a 100% online tutor. And if anyone ever needs middle schoolers, I tutor math, science through Apple Ruth, and also ACT and SAT when your student gets to there. So if you are ever interested in a tutor and you ask for KP, everyone knows who that is. So try to do a shameless plug there for myself for a second. So
shameless plug away. James, do you want to shameless plug anything before we move on? I like it.
Well,
come to the Galloway School.
I was going to reference, it's a little bit of a shameless plug as my backdrop, but this is a unique place, the Galloway School. We are committed to progressive learning. We are committed to the whole child approach that exists from kindergarten or pre-K3 all the way through 12th grade. I would encourage your families to come and see what we're doing and who we are. We are authentic and we are true to who we are. Our foundation, we will continue to build upon. We continue to look towards the future. We want to make sure that we're preparing students for that next step. And that next step, not just being college, but the real world. Your student will know who they are as they leave the Galloway School, and they'll know what they want to do and where they want to go when they leave the Galloway School, which is something we're committed to. So come see more, come learn more. And thank you so much to Apple Ruth Tutoring and Natalie for this opportunity, and to Ginger for this opportunity. I'm very grateful to be able to share some advice that I've gleaned over the years. Thank you.
Thank you. We're excited as well. Just to make sure that you guys know about more upcoming opportunities. Hopefully this has been as helpful to those of you who are here as it has been to me. If you heard something tonight and you're like, oh my gosh, my kid might need more help, by all means, we do tutoring and executive function coaching, and KP doesn't have to plug herself because she is wonderful. I will put a link in the chat, to speak to one of our advisors if that is a thing that you want to do. But I would also just encourage you, if this has been helpful tonight and you're like, oh, that has whet my appetite for more information, good free resources. Our academic success webinar series is coming up this next month. And we've got 3 different webinars full of great expert advice, much like this one. So How Learning Works, Brain Science 101 is coming up on September 7th. And then How to Prepare. So when KP was describing her student who looked at his math to study, if that resonated and you're like, oh gosh, my kid might need some study skills, we're going to be going over some of those core study skills for free on September 21st. And then really how to put it all together, how to show off what you know when it comes time to do that paper, that project, or that test is coming up at the end of the month. So you can reserve your spot at appruth.com/academic success. And, I think that is it. I'm just so grateful for tonight. Grateful for reminders that the focus button exists, that routines are helpful and important even at this age. I think when they're little, right, we do the bedtime routines, we do all of that, and it's easy to fall out of that when they get older. So excited for the reminder. I like the Sunday and Wednesday schedule, so we'll be implementing that, and just the reminders to, again, praise that effort and not necessarily the outcome, because at the end of the day, we all want kids who are thriving and happy and ready to go into the world. And that is, about more than a GPA or more than a test score or more than anything else. So thank you all. And thank you guys for staying. And that is it for us. So good night, everyone.
Good night. Goodbye.